Good morning, everyone. It's Monday, March 22nd, and I am delighted to be with all of you today with our dear Dr. Alba Ludmer, one of our fellow parishioners, and you've actually seen her on our website as, I can't believe it's almost a year ago that she shared some advice with us at the beginning of the pandemic. Now I believe we're towards the end of the pandemic, I hope and pray, and I invited her to be back on to share, some other thoughts with us that I thought would help us to cope, and not only cope, but hopefully to thrive during this time as we're all, as I said, approaching what we hope is the end of this pandemic, and soon everyone will be vaccinated and everyone will be in much better shape, and we'll get that herd immunity and we'll be able to take off the mask and do all those different things. So thank you, Alba, so much for being here. Thank you for always sharing your wisdom and all your years of experience as a psychologist, and you've helped so many hundreds of people throughout your life, and now you're helping hundreds more by coming on. So thank you.
You're just too kind, Father Stephen. Thank you for that.
You're most welcome.
And introduction. I'm actually very happy to be here again. When Father Stephen asked me to talk about how the pandemic had aggravated the grieving and the losses that we have incurred, I said, yes, we definitely need to do that. And I recall that I spoke to you last year, back in April, and we were talking about the need to identify and manage stress so that it did not become a clinical entity, meaning a full-blown anxiety disorder, which can be very debilitating. And I also share with you a few techniques that can be utilized, I said back then, but are very current. We need to continue to do that for the foreseeable future. And they were, among others, progressive relaxation, meditation, guided imagery, intentional breathing, and of course prayer, using the Psalms or a favorite scripture verse will work very well. So let's continue to do that.
Right. And I do remember all of those techniques that I know I try to incorporate in my life. I know many of you did as well. And one of the ideas I shared with Alba when we were discussing about bringing her back on is that the word resiliency has really come to my mind a lot. And there was actually different circumstances, one in particular, an elderly woman actually from my previous parish who really was the epitome of resiliency in her own life with all of the physical ailments that she had. And actually on her little funeral worship guide that we had, we put the definition of resiliency on the back. So I thought that was something not only that woman incorporated in her own life, but that it's something that we all need to strive to incorporate in our life. So I asked Alba when she would come on today if she could speak to all of us about resiliency, and so.
Well, I'm delighted that you bring up this subject, Father Stephen, because a great deal of what is happening to us happens almost at an unconscious level, and we are not identifying, not honoring, not celebrating all that we are doing to cope with the pandemic and all the demands that have been placed upon us. The fact that we are all functioning, the fact that we have not been crushed by these tremendously devastating waves of problems and illness and loss and death, it's a testament to the fact that we are absorbing, enduring, and overcoming all these tremendous difficulties. The idea in here is to bring into our conscious world the gains that we are accruing going through the pandemic. We are acquiring rather, a skill, a survival skill that has allowed us to endure the crashing waves of grieving, the pandemic, the illnesses, and all the losses absorb them, adapt to the circumstances, utilizing all the strengths that we have and we have taken for granted. We have exhibited a tremendous amount of courage. We are not talking enough about that, about the courage. Courage was actually very pithily described by Ernest Hemingway. He said in his poetic literary sense, courage is grace under pressure. Sounds
I remember
wonderful.
that, yeah.
Grace under pressure. And under pressure. We acquire resilience only through surviving catastrophes such as this one, traumas, deaths, and losses. It's the only way in which is developed. People who live in some kind of alternate reality don't have that. That's not true for us. We all are developing this tremendously powerful strength.
And when you say that, the image that was coming to my mind was almost like physical exercise.
Yes.
Like if I haven't done push-ups in a long time and I try to do them, I can probably get, 10 of them done, but then I'm not feeling it. But if every day I do, the push-ups, over time I can then do 20 at a time or 30 or, building that up. So I presume that's that same thing, like all of us, because we've been forced into this crucible, it's then allowed us to develop resiliency, which otherwise we wouldn't have developed.
Yes.
Right? I mean, in that sense of what you're saying.
That is correct. We are using that every single moment of our lives. And a word about courage. Courage is not the absence of fear at all. Courage means that we identify the threats, and we have been threatened plenty and continue to be. We acknowledge the fear, we embrace it, and yet we do what we need to do to overcome the fear. We have been doing that. So let's celebrate the resilience and the courage that we all have exhibited and will continue to do so.
So if I may just pause you for a second there. So, and in particular, one of the things I was asking Alba to come on for was that there has been a lot more death and dying during this time. And in many ways, it's been more difficult for us to minister because, for example, one of our parishioners was in the hospital or is still in the hospital today, and I can't get in because of the regulations that are there to try to protect her and the other people at the hospital. So thankfully, I know the chaplain, and I asked the chaplain to go in, and he anointed her, and he did all those things. But I think for a lot of people during this time, those normal ways of dealing with illness or dealing with death and dying have really been truncated by the reality of the pandemic. And I remember one of the first deaths I had to deal with during the pandemic was this woman who basically spent the last month of her life in a hospital room or a nursing home room by herself, and her 5 daughters couldn't go to visit her. She was one of those kind of Italian matriarchs who was always, grabbing and, touching and all that stuff, and yet basically died alone. So I think for her family and so many other families, this pandemic has interrupted the normal way that we would go about that. So, death and dying in and of itself at any normal time would be difficult. But I would love for Alba to explain a little bit more some of the factors of the pandemic that are complicating our grief. And I think in some ways maybe postponing the grief, which I don't know if the postponement leads to deeper complications long term, or what are some of the factors that you're seeing? Even, for example, like I would love us to have our normal bereavement ministry, but because of the restrictions from the CDC and from our own archdiocese and what you can or can't do, we've basically had to put that on a hiatus. We still have our phone number and people can call in, and we'll make sure we put that in the email blast. But could you speak a little bit to that, how the pandemic is impacting death, dying, grieving, all of those things? That would be sure very helpful.
Of course. The pandemic, as we all know, has had many components. many issues have surfaced which are new, traumatic, difficult, and very scary. We all in the nation and in the world have incurred losses of one type or another. Many, many losses. The loss of job, loss of friends, loss of freedom of movement, loss of schooling as we have known, and loss of college plans for our young people, loss of even a tiny little space to be alone, because we have all been in quarantine. We can be forced to be so isolated. The isolation itself is absolutely abnormal. We are not made to be live in isolation, because in actuality we get to know ourselves through others. We don't know ourselves in isolation at all. So the loved ones have been kept at arm's length. And yes, then there is the excuse me, the traumatic elements of this. I will venture to say that because loved ones have died alone, because the relatives have not been allowed to come in, that in and of itself is a major trauma. And many of the people who are now grieving the losses may be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and from another disorder that is called acute stress disorder. This complicates the issue. So we have grieving. Grieving in and of itself, as you well said, is terrible. It's a loss. It's the biggest stressor in our lives when we lose someone. It's the biggest one. It's the number one. On top of that, then we have the job, the financial insecurity, the loss, the college, the this and the that, pile onto this. Add to that the post-traumatic stress disorder symptomatology. Add to that the acute stress disorder, and then it's like we are all weighted down. And the grieving becomes either extremely difficult, it can be delayed, it can be postponed, it can be finished, or it can become complicated grieving, which is the one you alluded to, in which the grieving goes on and on and on for months and months and months, as is happening now. A lot of that actually, however, is normal. I would like for us to normalize the individual experiences that we have. My experience is mine and is different from yours. You will grieve in a way, I grieve in another way, and let me honor that and respect that. Grieving, depression, and anxiety coexist in the grieving, and it's normal, it's part of the issue. Grieving of depression and anxiety during this time is not an illness. It doesn't need to be medicated.
Correct.
But we all need to be aware of the manifestation, because if the person becomes non-functional, that is when then the reaching out to the general practitioner or a psychiatrist or a psychologist become very important. So that will pretty much, in a nutshell.
Right, and thank you for that, to normalize that. And I often say that to actually families, you know, when, for example, a father dies or a mother dies and there's, say, 3 or 4 children, as you were saying, each person will grieve in their own way. And sometimes I have parishioners say, well, you know, my sister's not even crying. I mean, I'm crying all the time. She must not care about mom or dad. And I would say, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's like, well, hold on a second. We all process things so differently, and no two people are going, you know, to grieve in the same way, and no two people are going to deal with the pandemic in the same way. I know some people that just really have a hard time with the mask, and it's just, you know, leading to a lot of anxiety for them, where other people seem to get along with it pretty well. Actually, a little commercial interruption. A woman from our parish just told me about this thing called the halo mask, H-A-L-O, halo, kind of like what you see above, well, Alba's head, not my head, but the glow you see above her head, the halo. But they're called the halo mask. Which I think they're about $30 each or something. They're kind of expensive. She said, I haven't bought one yet, but she said the way it's structured, you get all the protection, but you don't feel as suffocated as sometimes we feel. So, you know, just putting it out there or something. But Alba, thank you for all of those thoughts and all those things that can help us. I'd love to end the interview, you know, if you have any tips any ideas that you could share with us? As you mentioned before, there's a lot of resiliency out there. We're all getting through this in a way. There are some people, however, that are struggling more, and when they get to a point where they're not functioning well, then obviously we know they need to reach out to the professional support community around us. But prior to getting to that level, which hopefully most of us won't because of the resiliency that we're building up, do you have any particular tips that you could share with all of us that would help us during what we hope is the end of this tunnel as we're coming out, hopefully, to the light? Any tips that you have at this time you want to share?
Yes, indeed. There are many tips, but our time is limited, and I will speak very quickly, if I can speak quickly, about two entities that we all have and we all use even though we don't notice it. One is the physiological immune system and the other one is the psychological immune system. As the immune part says it, the body when attacked, our bodies when attacked, the body recognizes this intruder and immediately starts producing antibodies, the proteins that will be protective, like the army that comes to our rescue. The psychological system is similar and works in the same manner. When we, in this particular pandemic, is another thing that I beg you to become aware of and celebrate your wonderful psychological immune system that has allowed us to do this resilient part, this bouncing back, and we bounce back and go back into bounce back, and we are hitting again and again, and we bounce back. The psychological immune system sends also the psychological antibodies when the stress gets to be this maximized. I'm going to mention 2 or 3 techniques that will strengthen the psychological immune system and by extension our physiological immune system, because they work hand in hand. Out of the University of Texas came a technique in the 1980s that was started and pioneered by a psychologist by the name of James Penn Baker. The technique is called expressive writing. I have used it in my practice widely. I recommend that without hesitation. It means that the person is advised to write 10 to 15 minutes daily if possible, and is going to write about what is happening to him or her at the moment in an unfiltered manner. It's not censored, it's not edited, it's not corrected for grammar, for anything. It's just write and put it away. That acts as it's a form of catharsis. There is a lot of emotionality placed into it. Have the tissues by you when that happens. That will strengthen the psychological immune system.
And can I pause you there? Because sometimes for years and years, which I have to confess I've stopped, unfortunately, but I used to keep a little journal, and every night I would just take a few minutes and I would just write in the journal. But I wrote it as kind of like an open letter to God, in a sense. So usually the entry would begin, Dear God, thank you for this day. I'm sorry for the time that, whatever, I wasn't as generous as I wanted to be, or thank you for the wonderful grace of meeting this person I never met before, but how much they inspired me. Whatever it was, I found that by writing it, and writing it to God in that sense, it morphed in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it was like a prayer of petition. Lord, please help me that I could be better at this tomorrow. Or sometimes just, thank you. Thank you for that grace. Thank you for that person. But I did find in writing it would often well up in me a sense of gratitude for the gifts of the day, which otherwise I think if I wasn't writing in the journal, I don't think I would have savored or appreciated as much those graces, or would have gone undetected. So the journaling can take many forms, I presume. It can just be writing what's happening, but it could be like an open letter to God, or it could be...
It can be in any form, as long as as you can do it. The minimum will be 3 to 4 times a week and 10 to 15 minutes. And in what you said, you bring the word gratitude. That's another fabulous technique to adapt, to practice, and to embrace, because it's in the field of positive psychology, and certainly in the psychological immune system, gratitude has been found to be a fantastic way for us to become more alive, that the problems are not burdening us so badly, because there is always something to be grateful for. Correct. If you wake up in the morning and say, thank you, Lord, for this new day. Thank you that I am walking. Thank you that I'm brushing my teeth. Thank you that I'm having this food. Thank you for all of that. People who are able to do that, as you were saying so well, are happier and they fare better long term when catastrophes strike. So that's another way. It's keeping like a gratitude journal. The letters to God are great. You can write letters to your loved one, letters of forgiveness, letters of love, whatever you wanted to say that you couldn't say, write it out, put it on paper. All of that is very helpful.
Good.
So these two things will, and there is another one that I'll say very quickly, is self-talk. Self-talk is absolutely one of the most important and necessary ones. In self-talk, what we are going to do is we are going to challenge our automatic, negative, catastrophic thinking. The thoughts come in and they come in and continue and continue. If left unattended, they are going to take over our minds, and with the array of feelings that come with that. In the self-talk, you said, stop, what am I thinking? Why am I feeling this way? Pay attention to the thought is going to lead you to the feeling, and what you are going to do is say something simple. I'm not going to think about that now. Or, I am going to sing a song, or I'm going to turn the music on and I will dance around the room, or I'm going to take a stroll in the house, and you can do all things. So self-talk, you can always, the idea is, and it works, I have also used that widely in my practice, we can talk ourselves out of any situation. It requires awareness. Awareness of how the thought takes possession of us, and we become less able to manage the demands of life.
And that sounds very much, I remember studying when I was in social work school, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, right? CBT. Then that whole idea of being able to, as you say, I think pause, because I think that's probably one of the key moments, because when we get caught in that thinking that's negative and spiraling, it's really important, as you said, to stop, hold on a second, because many times that stuff is not even true, it's exaggerated, and it makes us feel bad about ourselves. And if we can only stop it, and then, as you said, the more positive self-talk, and then I just, because I know we are running out of time, but the other thing that you mentioned there, which I find on a personal level, when I'm feeling more stressed, and now that the weather is getting better and we're able to, I find sometimes I'll just like walk around the property, once or twice, and it's just amazing how hearing a bird chirp or seeing a little rabbit dart out of a bush, or the fox, we have a neat little fox that runs around the property sometimes, it's just, I don't know if it's just that it distracts you or it puts you into touch with God's beauty in nature, or whatever it may be, but I find sometimes just doing one lap, I come back and there's an alleviation of the stress. There's kind of like stretching out a little bit and feeling a little bit. Maybe we'll go for a walk after this interview. But thank you. I wish we could go on, and I thank for all of you parishioners for tuning in. And from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of all of our hearts, thank you for sharing these ideas. They're all wonderful, and hopefully we'll be able to put them into practice. And if there's anyone who's out there, though, as Alba was saying, if the stress is getting to be too much, please don't hesitate to reach out. Right? We don't want to get to that boiling point or that breaking point. There's always hope. As Pope Francis says so beautifully, and he repeats it all the time, don't let anyone steal your hope. You know, don't let any situation, anything steal our hope. There is always hope as long as we live, and there's always good people like Alba and her practice, and good other psychologists, psychiatrists, other people that are all here, clergy included, that we're here to support you. So I hope this helps, and I hope you will play this video and share it with the other friends who you think may get some benefit out of it. And any last thoughts you want to share before we wrap up?
I will end up by saying, remember that your children and grandchildren are also becoming resilient. And this is a treasure that we have, and a treasure that we will keep on practicing for the rest of our lives. Embrace ourselves, embrace wherever you are, embrace your feelings, honor them, name them as much as you can. And my last words will be something that you remind us of continuously. And it is, endure in affliction and persevere in hope. You say that all the time.
Yes, Romans 12:12. Very
endure,
good.
Let's all endure in affliction and persevere on that, on hope.
Amen. Thank you,
Amen.
Alba. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.